Hi, I'm Emily. I lead the DevRel team at Scroll. So if you're not familiar with Scroll, we are an EVM compatible ZK rollup.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm the ecosystem lead at Lightlink. Lightlink is an EVM equivalent rollup layer 2. We offer a gasless abstracted mode for whitelisted contracts for enterprise use. That's sort of our differentiator, but we're moving into abstracting the whole experience for users and devs alike.
Hi, everyone. David Walensky from Aptos Labs, head of engineering. Over at Aptos Labs, we're building a new layer 1 built from the ground up using MoveVM. We're the highest throughput, lowest latency blockchain out there. You can push out 10,000 plus transactions per second, meanwhile getting sub-second latency, all powered by the secure and ever-powerful MoveVM.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris. I work at Across Protocol. Across is an intent bridge where we're optimizing for speed and interoperability. We recently launched with Uniswap as their canonical bridging infrastructure. And we'll dig into what intents and all this is in a bit, I'm sure.
Cool. Well, to jump right into things, again, this panel is about modularity. We've got some projects here that are, I'd say, kind of on the full spectrum of modularity. Some that are kind of quite modular layers, some less, some all over the place. So I want to kind of get your guys' thoughts on what does modularity mean to you guys? What is the benefits, to developers, to applications, to users, and what are some of the potential drawbacks of the modular movement, modular technology?
Okay, cool. That's a lot. So I'm going to try and not address every single question so that you guys have some breathing room. So I think the first piece was did you ask what modular technology is?
What does modular mean to you?
Yeah, what does modular mean to me? So I think modular means to me is probably easier to set against the context of what it is not. So we think about monolithic versus modular blockchains, right? So if we think about blockchains as general, they require settlement, consensus, data availability, and execution. What modularity does is allow us to kind of pick up each of these pieces and combine them however we want, right? So when we look at rollups like Scroll, for example, we pull off the execution layer, and that allows us to scale Ethereum in that way. If you look at other projects, they might pull off the data availability layer. They might use someone else for consensus and things like that. So that's what modularity means to me.
Yeah, to us at Lightlink, it means optionality about what we can offer for the end user and developers on the network. So at the moment, we're using Celestia as our data availability layer, for example, but we're also looking at ERP 4844 blobs as an option too. At the end of the day, we'll probably go with a solution that is most affordable for the network and the end user. So therefore, we can pass on the savings that we're making onto the users of the chain themselves.
So we're a layer 1, so we took modularity in a completely different direction, and we thought about what can we accomplish by building something with modular design principles. And so we're actually able to provide all the core components inside of what you'd expect within a blockchain space. And at the same time, by engineering these pieces modularly, we're able to choose the best component that actually fits inside of a single vertical. And that gives a general purpose blockchain that can then be used for whatever application that you want. And over time, we're actually able to bring in new research, new endeavors to make sure that we're continuously at the forefront of what provides the best possible user experience with no compromises.
Okay, this might be a hot take, but I think for me, modularity means fragmentation because we've got all these modular stacks. We've now fragmented the ecosystem. And for us, that's our actual use case, right? Is resolving this fragmentation. Obviously, modularity also means components in our design where we have different intent, settlement, and relay layers. But yeah, it depends on how you look at it.
That was a great way to close that up. I was actually going to follow up with you, David, because I think a lot of people would consider Aptos to be a more monolithic chain and kind of coming from the side of the ecosystem that's had some criticisms against the modular space. So I was curious kind of your thoughts there. I think kind of Chris set that up well with a little bit of a poke at modularity of its fragmentation. But yeah, for you, I guess, first, David, what are some of the drawbacks you see of modularity and maybe do you think Aptos is taking a different approach to some of those issues?
Well, I mean, that kind of is going to start detracting from my hot take, so I'm not sure how far I want to go down the path. But I think there's a good question. When you have a blockchain that can scale up to the scale that we're able to demonstrate with Aptos, in a single day, we had over 330 million transactions. You don't see that anywhere, even close in terms of order of magnitude, anywhere else. And so when you have that opportunity for interoperability, there's a good question. What can we do to actually bring forth all the technology into a single house, all the value that you're being seen on these other chains, on these other modular environments, into what Aptos is providing? That's actually the question that I have for a lot of the other participants here, to understand how we can learn from each other and build what's best possible for all of the consumers in the Web3 space, so that we can also bring in those Web2 consumers over time.
Yeah, I'll bring this over to you, Dan and Emily. I mean, you guys are both building, rollups on Ethereum. This is very much in the modular space. And as I kind of alluded to, like, there's been some criticism of, Ethereum's got 1 million rollups now. You look at LTV, there's so many rollups. Is that creating fragmentation? How do you guys think about kind of some of the UX issues, some of the overall challenges, developer issues as well, of, the modular approach that's been taken by kind of the Ethereum and I'd say maybe the Celestia ecosystems?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think rollups were definitely born out of a need rather than a necessity. Wait, that means the same thing. I'm using a synonym. It was born out of a need, basically, right? When it comes to building, I think modularity for Ethereum, a lot of it hinges on the fact that we want to and like to leverage the power of the Ethereum community and all the stuff that's going on in there already, and how that like propagates into rollups and how much it's needed. It's kind of like a necessary evil from the perspective of as it is existing today, right? Like, no, I think L2 can sustain all of the different transactions that we need, right? Like, the volume wise, the single L2 just won't be able to handle. Like, multi-chain is something that is requisite for like Ethereum specifically to scale. So I guess props to you, Aptos, for being able to be like that second mover and bring in all these new ideas. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so like when it comes to like scroll specifically, right, we definitely see that type of future. What that looks like for us is we just recently launched our scroll SDK. So what this allows you to do is use the scroll stack and then just build your own chains from that. Keeping in mind, I guess, like how you build things together in this world where we do have to have multiple rollups. We've built it in a way that is very, I guess you could say, I don't want to use the word interoperable, but you can think of it as you launch it, there's these things called gadgets where you can kind of add what you want and customize it to your own need depending on your use case. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's like my personal opinion, right? Like all these rollups is just like, it's not the best. It is a necessary evil in a sense, but I think there's ways to resolve it that we have been doing that are exciting and necessitate the reason we have this panel.
Absolutely. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it's really interesting how all of the layer twos have been born sort of organically from the need due to the gas costs on layer one. And there is certainly the issue of fragmentation between the chains. You've got end users that need to add multiple RPCs to their wallets and switch between. And I've got funds over on this chain and I need them over there. So yeah, a cross can probably help a lot with that sort of issue. But from the developer perspective as well, we're abstracting a lot of that experience too. We're providing a toolkit to allow developers to interact with the chain regardless of, I guess, the intricacies of how to make specific calls. We're building an API so that no matter what changes we make under the hood, developers will have their applications remain consistently performing the way in which they've built them from day one.
Oh yeah, and if there's one thing I want to shill from the perspective of, I think like the layer twos are working together on, as if you guys are familiar with like roll up improvement proposals. I think there's quite a few that come through talking about like how do we specifically solve the problem of like, oh, there's all this information across all these different L2s. So check it out. We have L1S load. Go upvote it on Ethereum Magicians because we need that.
Great proposal. I'll second that one. To kind of dig more into what you guys were talking about, interoperability has certainly been, like, as I alluded to, one of the main issues. You guys all kind of touched on it a bit. How are you guys specifically thinking about interoperability and also how opinionated do you guys feel that the project creating a chain needs to be? We have right now interoperability is being addressed oftentimes by third-party projects like Across that are doing an awesome job. How much do you guys think that the chain itself needs to embrace kind of certain directions, and how much do you think the application layer can solve these problems for users?
Well, unless there's a pathway to interoperate with other chains on the network, such as, there's cross-chain messaging solutions like Layer 0, Wormhole, for instance. We felt like a bit of an island until we had our Layer 0 endpoint deployed and people were able to come to our network. And we're able also to feed off other activity on other networks where we may be storing more sort of high velocity data on our chain through NFTs, whereas the assets that are a store of value are remaining on other chains. So I think these cross-chain messaging solutions are essential at this point. And until we get something closer, I guess we're also considering looking at joining the OP superchain as well. And as far as I'm aware, they've got a lot of APIs in development, which will help, fellow superchain citizens sort of talk to each other. So that's something that we're looking forward to leverage on as well.
Are those things like the S-Load EIP that Emily was alluding to?
Which part?
You mentioned some EIPs.
Oh, RIP, I don't remember the numbers
All right.
because it's just a bunch of numbers. No, L1S load is different from this, but I guess I can touch a bit about being opinionated. So I think there's two ways to address this question, right? When we talk about interoperability from the chain perspective, I would say that's probably more in the scope of like how Across probably views things, right? Because you guys are the heralds of like helping us with that, right? So if you think of it like, I'm not going to say I speak for Scroll here specifically, but maybe more so when we think about like EVM equivalent rollups, making it as easy as possible for projects like Across to deploy across all these different chains is like, I think a core component of like, I guess, purporting, is that a word? That narrative. When I talk about RIP specifically, that's just like shared infrastructure at the precompile level for L1s. Where was I? Oh, and then I do want to touch on the super chain aspect because I think that is an interesting thing when you talk about, because that's a kind of a new space we have, right? We have Superchain, now we have Scroll SDK, ZK Sync has something that's called something, I think Polygon Ag Layer. And I think this is where you get into the opinions of different chains and how they view their own internal multi-chain ecosystems. And from the Scroll's perspective, the way we've built it is like to be very unopinionated because our idea is basically, it's like we don't like walled gardens where we are. So there's a lot of kind of bits and pieces and baubles you can add, you can customize, you can also share with others, which enables, I guess, like greater sharing with others outside of the Scroll ecosystem. I can't get into much detail because I don't want to hog the time, but yeah.
I think though, to double down on something you said there around like being opinionated, there's like a boundary here that is important, right? Like when you're trying to create an ecosystem that others need to come and build on top of, if you enshrine certain things like Wormhole is our canonical bridge or Layer 0 is our canonical bridge, there's like implications that this has for applications, right? And like thinking through that as an ecosystem, I think is very important. For example, like Arbitrum, Optimism, Scroll, like all these different chains have like different interfaces on their canonical bridges. Like this is something that makes this very difficult. So maybe this is like a venue where we should collectively be more opinionated and then like collectively decide on more standards at these points. The other thing I'll say that from my perspective, and I think Across shares a similar take here, is around like canonical bridging and like being, if we're aligned with Ethereum as different application chains, then using the Ethereum bridge, the native bridge as like the canonical venue in and out of these chains, or within like the superchain ecosystem becomes like the primary way to do this in a lot of cases, rather than like piggybacking off of alternative structures. So yeah, I guess being opinionated in the right places is important, and like alignment makes it easier for projects to then build on you.
One kind of follow-up on that, I know Across is looking to expand, right now Across, I believe, primarily works with the Ethereum rollup space across rollups, and as you mentioned, uses the canonical bridge as the like ultimate source of truth, ultimate way that, Across manages settlement, I guess. How does it work if you were to, I know Across is looking to expand beyond the Ethereum ecosystem to, I think Solana's next, but I imagine you guys might want to expand to something like Aptos at some point. How does it work, or how are you guys thinking in that aspect for chains that don't have like a real strong canonical bridge?
Yeah. So Solana is next, going into audit later this month. I can say this because it's on our public GitHub, so I'm not revealing anything it's not public. The way we think about this is really honestly from like a risk perspective and like who in our ecosystem we want to expose to different centralized components. So right now Across has like no centralized bridge operators. There's no Layer 0 or any like trade-offs that we make along this design space because we use canonical bridges everywhere. But to your question, how do we then get to Solana? So to answer that, the decision that we made is to use CCTP in this regard. And the reasoning is if you are holding USDC, you are completely exposed to CCTP anyways, right? If CCTP breaks, USDC is dead anyways. So functionally, we don't view that we're adding any additional trust assumptions in that design. And that's going to be the primary and only asset that we can support between Ethereum and Solana, which I think is reasonable, right? Like holding wrapped ETH on Solana or wrapped Sol on ETH is a flow that maybe some users want to do, but I don't think that's like the primary flow that people care about, especially when transitioning between like such discrete domains. So yeah, the requirement really is a canonical bridge. I will say, though, we're also looking into many other interesting solutions, like Succinct SP1 in combination with like their Helios Lite client, for example, enables us to bridge Ethereum state to other domains in a permissionless way, as long as we can verify those consensus proofs in the target domain. And this in combination with other techniques could enable us to get to places like Aptos that might not have CCTP or USDC as like a canonical integration at this point. So yeah, I think it's very much dependent on what trade-offs you want to make ultimately at the end of the day. And for us, canonical assets, canonical bridging, in terms of like the risk profile that we expose LPs to is like the boundary that we draw. Yeah.
Very interesting.
I'd like to chime in real quick. You know, Aptos, new layer one, new technology, new VM, required a lot of engineering to actually get this up off the ground, but also required a lot of partnership engagement. And so we were very fortunate to launch both with Layer 0 and Wormhole on day one. But that also meant, you know, we were connected to the Solana ecosystem. They wanted to use Wormhole. We were connected to the Ethereum ecosystem. They use Layer 0. It was really interesting to see the evolution over time. It turned out that Layer 0 kind of dominated. So if you go to any of the DeFi, you'll see Layer 0 USDC being the dominant form, which you're probably familiar with. And then in the context of, you know, it's up to the DeFi entities to kind of set up the swaps so you can seamlessly go between the two. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to further explore and get more native. And we're really excited. Our launch, USDT, is going to be launching officially and effectively in very soon, maybe this week, I believe. And so you'll be able to easily be able to get natives in that regards. You know, we're excited about the potential for other partnerships across other stables that will make it easier for friends like you to come on board. And then I think the other aspect that's interesting in interoperability is what you can leverage when you have a high performance network, leveraging assets on other chains. And so we actually have a protocol called Merkle Trade that provides 1000x leverage using Aptos as a settlement layer, but leveraging assets on other chains, especially Ethereum. And so there's a lot of really cool technology you can build by leveraging these bridges.
Very cool. I think it's a good transition there to the next topic, which I was going to ask about. You know, a key aspect in blockchains in general, and especially in the modular world, is talking about the execution environments of these chains themselves. On stage, we've got, you know, 2 EVM rollups, and then, you know, Aptos is obviously using the Move virtual machine, the Move language. How do you guys think of the, you know, the cost, the benefits, you know, of the various execution environments, the various developer stacks across the space, and how do you think developers should be approaching the question of, you know, choosing what stack they want to build upon when they want to build a Web3 application?
I guess I'm next to you, so I'll go first. There's a lot of avenues to explore. I think at the base layer, when we talk about, I guess, EVM specifically, with ZK rollups, we have ZK EVMs. That's the environment we chose. And like, I guess within that space too, you have like different implementations that change, like, I guess, compatibility-wise with like smart contracts that you're used to writing already. So from the Scrolls perspective, right, we've been focused on EVM equivalence, right? So what that means for developers is your tools don't change. So if you're working with something like a Starknet or a ZK Sync, for example, the VM is not exactly the same. So you'll have to do like a plugin for hard hat. Certain things might not work out of the box, and that kind of fragments the experience. I think the thing that's actually really interesting, I think especially because you mentioned SP1, is how the design space of ZK VMs are changing, right? Where ZK VMs, so more so general purpose VMs, are starting to take the forefront, and we're seeing opportunities where we can actually prove like OP stack with what do you call it, ZK adaptability proofs. And so to that perspective, from Scroll's view as well, we actually are building a ZK VM that is public knowledge. It's not widely known, but check it out. It's called Sino. There's a paper on it. And so I think we've been thinking a lot about like what is the evolution of what the ZK VM looks like. I think from execution environment specifically, ZK is still the end game for us. So development wise, general purpose VMs are going to be, I think, have shown and proven themselves so far to be like really exciting, kind of changing the narrative.
Very cool.
I think when you look at the EVM space, it's super mature, and it's really a great experience to just study what everybody's developed, what everybody's using, and then identify what opportunities are going to be the best to pull into Aptos. We saw hard hats, and we've been rapidly building a hard hat equivalent so that we can bring developers in. They can have their own CI/CD, make it really easy to make sure their contracts, their whole stacks are operating correctly. But that's kind of the beginning. You look at other projects that you can see like with Tenderly and Alchemy that make it really easy to have web services that further extend into that space. And so, I think part of the developer experience is bringing more developers to explore Move, learn about Move, and give us that feedback so that we can further extend that. But it's really great just to see the evolution from all the contributors in the EVM space to learn from in that space.
Any other thoughts on virtual machines, languages, environments?
I just think tooling is so important, right? This is the big thing. Tooling is hard, and if you're not EVM equivalent, right, any deviation from the existing tool set is just hard, right? I mean, you guys can attest to that. So yeah, as a application developer, it's always going to be easier to deploy where the tooling works out of the box and where there's lower hurdles to cross.
Yeah, in that regard, I think the area that Aptos has been really focused on is providing core functionality embedded directly into the blockchain itself. And so, we actually support randomness that's not found on any other layer one. It's instantaneous randomness where most others have to go through the Chainlink VRF, which if you've not looked at the documentation, it's like a 7 or 8 step process, perfect for the faint of heart. We have social-based login, so you actually can leverage your social identity to get non-custodial access to your accounts on chain. So it's, more secure, safer than a lot of the other options out there that actually require custodial solutions. And then, as I said, the Move language itself, which is the core of Aptos, has been designed from the ground up to be safe and secure, hard to shoot yourself in the foot. Our auditors have consistently told us that it is the easiest language to actually audit. I mean, obviously, still a uphill battle, but I think we're making some decent inroads.
If I can interrupt, I love how you brought up, I think, security, because that's actually something that should also be considered when you're choosing your stack. And I think it's a really interesting relationship to EVM equivalents specifically. So the example I always cite, if you guys are familiar, who here is familiar with the Viper hack that happened? I don't know if it was this year or last year. Okay, a few of you. So if you guys don't know, Viper is basically the Python language for smart contracts, right? So from an auditing perspective, I think it's very common to just audit the smart contract code. Viper had a hack because there was a bug at the compiler level, right? So you would never get that from an auditing firm. So when you look at EVM equivalents, right, and languages behaving as you expected, that's like an additional kind of overhead you might need to think about as a security auditor. I think upstream from that, right, as an application developer building these types of apps, like how easy is it for you to, I guess, how reliable could you say your smart contract auditors are is one thing, but maybe on the other hand, like also are there auditors who are auditing in your language, right? And so that's kind of, I think, also the space of why you would choose something like Ethereum, right? Because the network effects is kind of where it sits.
Absolutely. We are getting into the tail end of this panel here. I believe you guys have prepared a couple of hot takes, so maybe we'll just kind of go down the row and have you guys share your hot takes on modularity, on maybe the Web3 ecosystem in general. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, I have quite a few. I have 2, but I'll just start with only one, and that's points are good.
Okay. Why are points good?
You said we only had a few times. I think like points are good. I mean, I always say this is also an opportunity for me to shill my invite code to Asian grocery delivery service called We. But from the perspective of like points in general is something that we are already very familiar with in Web 2 and no one hates on them, right? And what they are is an opportunity for us to be like, I guess, familiarized with new products. So when it comes to points and ecosystems, I think it serves really two good ways. I mean, like, obviously, I think there's a narrative around airdrop farmers that's not positive, but that's also my hot take, I guess. But a few things, right? So the first piece is points are a really strong lever for helping to grow ecosystems. So when it comes to like layer twos, for example, I guess any layer, right? Like TVL is actually very important for just like making lifeblood of DeFi work, right? So you do need some sort of way to bring liquidity on chain. I think the other aspect is actually, I always cite this story from ETH Denver, actually, where I met this grandma who was like farming Linea. And I was asking her, she was like, "Oh my God, this is so amazing!" And it's because basically her grandson had introduced her. She's like, "I didn't know what to do getting into Web3, but they laid out this whole plan of like interact with this step, interact with this step, interact with this step." And what that created was like a seamless experience of like, how do I interact with all the different types of applications in like the crypto ecosystem that has also been, I guess you could say, like due diligenced by the team themselves. And then on the like end of it, right, you get like that kickback from it. So, I mean, maybe points are overdone, but I do think they're necessary. Oh, and then the last piece that I do like about them is like it adds a layer of transparency to an extent. I don't like random airdrops. I mean, I like it when I get them, but I think from like the design perspective, I would prefer to like know where I'm at versus like trying to mash various activities.
I hope we can all get our grandmas to use our points programs. Dan, what is your hot take?
Yeah, I'm going to go out there and say that modularity is a buzzword that will live temporarily for only so long. I think that these individual components that everybody's sort of plucking and choosing for their chains will eventually become more uniform. It's something that we've experienced ourselves. We've got our own Geth client that we developed for our chain to help achieve the gasless capabilities that we can provide. But there are all these other expected features of a chain network that are required that we found, that we've like the effort to go to introduce these to what we've built. It's just makes so much sense to come across to the OP stack to do. So I think that like we're going to see more of this sort of like separation of the wheat from the chaff to, I guess, bring things more in line. We'll see more and more chains born on the super chain and, within ag layer and these other ecosystems. And I think modularity sort of has a limited lifespan.
Hot take. We'll see. David, what is your hot take?
Well, part of me wants to continue on that one and say we're going to see modularity dovetail into Aptos. And so maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough. So you guys think we'll see like kind of that modularity might be this kind of like a Cambrian explosion right now, but that will kind of consolidate back down to kind of a few winning pieces of the stack?
Yeah, I mean, listening to all the technical amazements that are happening around us, like I said, we learn, we adapt, and we pull that into Aptos. And so I've always, people always ask me, what do you think about all these other blockchains? And, honestly, I come from a research background. I think it's phenomenal to see all this amazing technology, and we need to have this happening concurrently. But ultimately, what we always see is that there's always going to be something that is able to bring together the best of all of us. And that's Aptos.
Well put, well put. And to close it out, I think Christopher Cross would love to hear, a heart level hot take.
Don't know if I can hit a heart level hot take. But what I will say, which is maybe slightly contrarian to what you guys were saying, is that I think sooner than we think, users won't really care what chain they're on, right? This is very much like the abstraction thesis, but I think what matters is applications, and users are going to rather care about where their applications are. And this concept of like a balance or wherever their funds are at is actually unimportant. So, if it's an application specific chain or moving between these chains, the user doesn't care. They just want to like use the app, and the chain just disappears underneath the hood. And, we've seen this more and more with like how wallets are becoming better integrated multi-chain, but this is only going to improve. And yeah, I mean, this is the tooling that we're building, right? To continue to further abstract away the chain underneath and just provide the user the application at the end of the day.
If you think the users are not going to care about which chains they're on, what do you think is going to really determine which chains are successful, which chains like
I
have
think
a
the apps choose, right? And I think the apps a lot of the time are going to be creating their own chains, as we've seen with Unichain. And I think application-specific rollups, maybe this is the hot take given the contents, the other panelists here, but I think application-specific chains is really going to drive the next cycle and like the next onboarding of the next X million users.
Sounds good. Well, I think we are just about at time. I want to thank all of our guests for joining me today, and thank you guys for coming out to listen.